Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar session. My name is Moshin Dean, the Environmental Finance Specialist at the UNDP Biofin program and responsible for the Pacific region, and I will be the moderator for the webinar today. This webinar is part of the UNDP-UNEP Finance Initiative Public-Private Community of Practice on Nature and Development finance series as a part of Revenues for Nature, which bridges private finance strategies with government-led national biodiversity strategies and action plans to mobilize funding for nature. This series will focus on key enablers to achieving the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework Target 19, aligning public and private sector priorities to unlock new investment opportunities. This webinar session will explore how marine finance financial instruments can unlock credible revenue pathways to scale nature-positive investments and support national implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Bringing together public, private, and community stakeholders, this session draws on emerging insights from revenues for nature supported models and global case studies to examine practical approaches already in action, from regulatory and supply chain mechanisms to compensatory schemes. Speakers today will share early lessons on aligning ecological outcomes, social benefits, and investor returns and outline the enabling conditions for success across geographies and sectors, including blended finance and de-risking structures, standardized monitoring, reporting, and verification, and governance frameworks, modular project designs, and strong community participation. This discussion today will distill actionable insights for governments, financial institutions, corporates, and project developers on integrating revenue pathways into national biodiversity finance strategies and mobilizing private capital at scale. I'm just going to do a little bit of decorum around the use of Zoom. I'm sure we all are Zoom experts by now. So let me just cover the important logical and logistical highlights. Simultaneous interpretation is available in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. Thank you to our interpretation team for being with us today. To activate interpretation, click on the world icon at the bottom of your screen and select your preferred language. If you wish to change the language for interpretation during the webinar, you may click this icon. If you want to follow the English session, please select the English language button. I would also like to recommend that speakers and participants speak slowly. This will help facilitate an interpreter's job and the flow of the conversation smoothly. If you have any technical issues, to help you resolve them, you can send a private Zoom to our colleague Alicia, and she will be able to support you on that. Finally, this webinar is recorded and it will be available on the forum with today's presentations and recordings in different languages. We will also share the information with you by email after the webinar concludes. Now, let me frame today's sessions and the agenda. So today's webinar has been designed in a broader sense to engage with one of the most pressing opportunities of our time, and that is unlocking marine finance and revenue pathways for coastal and ecosystems. At a moment of growing urgency for our oceans, these sessions are designed to inspire fresh thinking on how finance can move beyond traditional models and actively shape a resilient nature-positive blue economy. At its core, this session serves as a bridge between vision and action. It brings together a broad spectrum of actors to explore how capital can be directed towards the sustainable use and restoration of coastal and marine systems. Rather than remaining abstract, today's engagements will, however, illuminate where real opportunities lie. That is how investments in areas such as blue bonds, coral reef insurance, permanence, among others, can generate both economic value and lasting environmental impacts. The discussions will cut through complex to surface clear, compelling pathways for engagement. It will highlight emerging models and real-world examples that demonstrate how innovative financing can catalyze scalable solutions, aligning financial returns with long-term health of our oceans. Ultimately, this webinar is about shifting perspectives from seeing oceans as vulnerable spaces in need of protection to recognizing them as dynamic, investable systems capable of delivering shared prosperity. It is an invitation to rethink the role of finance in shaping the future of our coasts and oceans and to act both in ambition and with agency. We will begin with 5 knowledge holders sharing their perspectives, case studies, which will then be followed by a plenary session with all our presenters. I'm looking forward to the exchanges of today's gathering of community of practice. The first opening session today will be from Sora Yoon, the Program Management Associate for the Regional Seas Branch program at UNEP. A presentation will highlight the critical roles of marine policies, drawing on our impactful work at the regional level to demonstrate why it matters for our oceans and coastal communities. Sora Yoon, in her current capacity, supports the implementation of regional seas coordination projects and the delivery of GBF and the BBNJ under the Regional Seas Program. She holds a doctorate in environmental law and a master's in international law. With experience in biodiversity-related legal frameworks, ocean governance, and ocean-based climate action. Prior to joining UNEP, she worked with national research institutes, including the Korea Institute of Ocean Science and Technology, Korea Environment Institute, and Korea Environmental Industry and Technological Institute, focusing on marine policy research, environmental cooperation, and multilateral process. Over to you, Sora Yoon.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me clearly. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Sora Yoon. I'm a Program Management Associate with the UNEP Business Seas branch. I will present UNEP's support for NBSAP updates and what updated NBSAPs say about marine ecosystems and how that creates the foundation for the finance discussion that follows. Next, please. A brief word on who we are. The UNEP Regional Seas Program brings together 18 business seas conventions and action plans covering 146 countries, the primary regional platforms for marine and coastal governance. Through this regional architecture, UNEP supports countries in updating their NBSAPs, helping them identify marine biodiversity priorities that can later guide biodiversity finance. Next slide, please. Marine ecosystems are central to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, from the 30 by 30 under Target 3 to blue carbon under Target 8 and to biodiversity finance under Target 19. Regional Seas Program contributes to these targets through 3 areas: updating NBSAPs for marine ecosystems, building the capacity of country representatives and experts, and strengthening harmonized monitoring and reporting framework, which is also critical for investor accountability. Next, please. To make this concrete, through our JEF-funded program, we've been supporting 5 businesses: the Abidjan, the Hena, and Nairobi Conventions, COP-C, and SCRAP, to mainstream marine and coastal ecosystems into national biodiversity planning. This involved a baseline assessment and regional capacity building workshops on ecosystem-based management, and knowledge products on blue carbon policy and OECM, ensuring marine ecosystems are treated as a genuine national priority in updated NBSAPs. Next, please. But our role hasn't stopped them planning. We have also been opening concrete pathways to finance. First, we developed an umbrella project on GBF Target 2 and 3, identifying regional priority actions for marine biodiversity, and used the foundation to support 3 regional cities in developing proposals to the JEF Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. Second, and this is a concrete vision, COP-C successfully secured funding from the Kunming-Biodiversity Fund to support Cambodia and the Philippines in MPA implementation. This is a direct example of NBSAP planning translating into finance mobilization at the country level. Third, looking ahead, Business program is planning to build the capacity to finance and implement MPA network that connect the national waters with the high sea.
Sora, I believe you're muted.
Sorry, could you let me know where I need to start? Yeah. Yes. So these are three areas among the marine priorities that Business program will further support as countries shift to the implementation of their updated NBSAPs. The first is MPA and OECM identification, expansion, and effective management. The second is marine ecosystems restoration, including mangroves, seagrasses, and surtmasses, which is your natural field for blue bond financing and voluntary carbon markets. The third is monitoring, reporting, and MRB, not just to for CBD compliance, but as the credibility and accountability infrastructure that investors require. By supporting implementation of these priorities, NBSAPs create a bridge to finance. Next, please. So the policy foundation is there. Now the question is how to further turn those commitments into investment. And that's exactly what we will explore in the rest of today's session. I look forward to the discussion and thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you so much, Sora, for that very insightful presentation, building on the important linkages between policy finance and marine ecosystem conservation under NBSAPs. We now move on to our next speaker, who is Amy Allen from the Green Finance Institute, and she will shed light on the Revenues for Nature program, drawing from the Marine Guidebook. Over to you, Amy.
Hi, can you hear me? Great.
Yeah, perfectly fine.
Thank you. Sorry, I was having trouble with unmuting. Thank you so much for having me. So yeah, I'm Amy Allen. I'm an International Nature Associate at the Green Finance Institute, and I also lead our work on oceans. So I'll just quickly walk through our Revenues for Nature program and then some of the publications that we've developed that are relevant to this discussion. So the Revenues for Nature program, it started in 2024 as a partnership between ourselves at the GFI, UNEP-FI, and UNDP Biofin. And the aim was really to identify and then support the replication or scaling of innovative revenue models and financing mechanisms that have been shown to successfully mobilize private capital for nature for a variety of ecosystems in diverse geographies. So part of that work, much of it has been on developing knowledge products, so developing case studies and guidebooks on models that have been successful to show what has worked and where there's been challenges and what would be needed to have these models replicate and scale. In addition, we've also hosted webinars like this one and events, and also directly financially and in kind supported a portfolio of revenue models to kind of support them on the path to scaling. So this month, we published a guidebook, the one on the left there, on models that support coastal and marine ecosystems. So this explored through a series of case studies how private capital can be successfully mobilized to support regeneration of these ecosystems. So it looks at a variety of models from tourism fees and payments for ecosystem services to financing mechanisms specifically for marine protected areas, as well as blue bonds and outcome-linked bonds. So if you'd like to learn about additional models beyond the ones that we are going to be discussing today, I'll share a link shortly to that paper in the chat. And then the second publication I wanted to highlight will be coming out next week. And this is a lessons learned paper that brings together sort of all of that we've learned from working with this portfolio of models over the last couple of years. The paper outlines some of the key enabling conditions that we've seen that support various revenue models, identify some of the key challenges or common challenges that they tend to face, and then what we see as the key unlocks that will support additional investment. So in particular, it looks at the role of catalytic capital and early grant funding to support the early development of different models, do the kind of feasibility and baselining work that's necessary for them to be successful, as well as developing investable project pipelines. It looks at the importance of technical assistance alongside financing to support capacity building, and also how policy can support demand. So it will be published as a full paper alongside a shorter synthesis brief. So we're really excited to share some of these lessons in the hope that it can help a variety of stakeholders develop and support really successful and high integrity revenue models for nature. So look out for that on Monday. And I think with that, I'll just pass it back to Mohsin to introduce the case studies.
Thank you so much, Amy, for showcasing the great knowledge materials that we have in hand and highlighting on some of the practical models and tools to support the effective implementation of thematic concepts that are related to oceans and marine in practice. We will now move on to the case study sessions, kicking off with the blue bonds case study from Fiji. And the next presenter is Mr. Vinil Narayan. Vinil has over 10 years of experience working in economic and planning sectors. In the national budget programming, financial and climate policy development space, and he has been doing project management at the national and the regional level. He specializes in catalyzing blended finance solutions for sustainable development that includes investments in marine conservation, rural renewable energy solutions, and integrated community development with an emphasis on building socio-economic resilience. He has a keen interest in emerging financial markets, macroeconomics, international climate negotiations, and capital stacking solutions for small and medium enterprise development. Over to you, Vinil.
Thank you, Mohsin. I think I was not able to unmute myself, but I'm finally able to. Thank you so much for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, my presentation today will be giving you an overview of the journey, the processes that we went through to really issue the Fiji Sovereign Blue Bond in 2023. If we can move on to the next slide. Before we get into the details of this blue bond issuance journey for Fiji, I would like to take you through just the rationale that really shaped why the Fijian government had decided to issue a sovereign blue bond with the support of UNDP and UNCDF. So first and foremost, Fiji is the 26th largest ocean state in the world. It is home to around 3.52% of the world's global coral reef population, 65,000 hectares of mangroves, almost the size of Singapore, and over 70% of the population living within 5 kilometers of the coastline. And so with that said, it was naturally so that Fiji wanted to really leverage off its ocean assets in the most sustainable and financially appropriate manner. And so having said that, one of the key policy drivers to really drive this leveraging process was actually to develop Fiji's national ocean policy from a policy standpoint. So next slide. With all that sort of context in mind, the Fijian government had embarked on establishing its or developing its national ocean policy that really was an amalgamation of over 48 national regulations and policies that guided Fiji's oceans space. It really brought everything together into a more sustainable, coherent, and focused approach. But the fact was that it's one thing to develop a national policy document, it's another thing to operationalize it. And one of the key things that we really wanted to be able to do, or the Fijian government really wanted to be able to do, was to be able to attach an appropriate financing mechanism or financial vehicle to showcase and demonstrate the Fijian government's strong intent to look at innovative financing solutions in the blue economy space and to diversify its blue economy space. So with that said, next slide. Back in 2017, the Fijian government had already issued a sovereign green bond worth around $50 million US, and there was a lot of learnings that had come about since then. And so once the national ocean policy was developed somewhere around the early 2002 period, 2022 period, a year later it was decided that we would repeat the successes of the green bond, but in a more sustainable and more focused manner by issuing a national sovereign blue bond. And this time around, there was a very clear and systematic process that we had followed, as opposed to the green bond, which was one of the first developing country green bond in the world, but it had its flaws as well. But with that said, I'll go on to the next slide. So the decision was made first and foremost to go ahead and develop a sovereign blue bond to operationalize the national ocean policy. However, the transactional cost to develop a bond itself was quite significant. And so UNDP, through its internal resource mobilization, as well as support from the government of UK, was able to sort of mobilize altogether about $2 million US to really structure the bond. It may seem quite steep, and it was, but we are proud to say that of the $2 million that was spent, it resulted in a $10 million leveraging or market mobilization, which I will explain down the line. So it was roughly around 1:5 ratio in terms of investment returns. But with that said, next slide. These funds went into really structuring the bonds per se, and the blue bonds rather per se. But the structuring happened under a 5-step implementation process, which we are now replicating, in the process of replicating in other countries around the Pacific, particularly in Vanuatu and Solomon Islands. So one of the key things, or the first thing, is to really look at developing your bond framework or sustainable bond framework, which really creates the parameters of what constitutes as a green, blue, or social project. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll go on. The rest of the presentation focuses one by one on how each of these steps were taken and what were the results. So next slide. With regards to developing the sustainable bond framework for Fiji, instead of basically having a green bond framework or blue bond framework or a gender bond framework, the idea was to develop a standard framework that really created a common taxonomy of what constitutes, as I mentioned earlier, what constitutes as a green, blue, and social project. And so that took into account a lot of international best practices and standards that were largely stipulated by the International Capital Market Association, ICMA standards, as well as other MDBs in other countries that had gone about issuing a thematic bond, and also the national documents, priorities, and procedures that were important for Fiji were also taken into consideration to develop this framework. But just to give you a flavor of what this framework has, if we go on to the next slide, from a blue economy perspective, it's stipulated or set out 10 focus areas or 10 thematic areas that the Fijian government wanted to focus its blue bond issuance on. And so whatever projects were selected or whatever projects that were financed needed to fall under these 10 thematic areas. And so each of these 10 thematic areas then has its own guidelines and procedures, etc., to really stipulate very clearly what qualifies as a blue bond or blue project and what qualifies as something else or something not. Next slide. So then once we had set the parameters and the framework and we knew how to demarcate these projects, the other thing that we really wanted to do was identify the projects per se that would actually be funded. And these were done through a comprehensive detailed feasibility study sort of step. But if we go on to the next slide, I'll explain a little bit more as to what it all entailed. Now, one of the key things was that this was a sovereign bond issuance. So it was issued by the government of Fiji, and it was largely targeted to government-funded projects in the national budget. And so one of the key things that we had done was we screened almost over 250 projects that the Fijian government had lined up in that particular year in 2023 and 2024 beyond. And so the idea and the intention was to be able to see which projects were nationally significant, which projects were ready to be implemented, and which projects were financially viable to be implemented per se. And so with that said, these projects, of the 250 projects, 18 projects were selected, and I'll explain what those 18 projects are. But broadly speaking, they were categorized into these 4 thematic areas that you see on the screen. One was around coastal protection. The second was around sustainable fisheries. The third was around building sustainable towns and cities. And of course, the fourth was around sustainable waste management. And so of the 18 projects, we could not do feasibility studies for all 18. It would have been too costly. So the idea was to do feasibility studies from an aggregated standpoint across these 4 thematic areas. And what these feasibility studies actually did was it really brought out the business case and the financial return case for each of the projects. So for every dollar that would be invested, what would be the economic returns? So these were the things that really the feasibility studies had really brought out. Because of the fact that you do not want to issue a sovereign bond, which is essentially, when you look at it quite clearly, it's national debt. So not to issue a national debt for the sake of issuing it, but to be able to issue a national debt that would unlock new and additional financing or new and additional economic opportunities for the country. So these 4 thematic areas were further split into 18 projects, which we'll see in the next slide, please. So first and foremost, and I know this is not readable. However, basically there was a multi-criteria analysis that was used to, as I mentioned earlier, to go through the 250 projects and really identify them. And this is just one of a detailed spreadsheet list that we had done to categorize these projects and to shortlist the 18. But if we can go on to the next slide. These 18 projects were basically as such. This particular slide shows the 18 projects broken down into the 4 thematic areas. In the interest of time, I will not be going through them project by project, but basically trying to explain that it was a $20 million Fijian dollar issuance, of which basically these 18 projects were spread across these 4 thematic areas. You can go on to the next slide. And then these 18 projects, of course, what this slide shows, and I'm sure that you will be getting this slide later on, shows which government agencies were responsible for those 18 projects. So basically the same thing as in the previous slide, but demarcated according to responsible government agencies. So involved in this whole issuance process were the Departments of Environment, Fisheries, Waterways, Infrastructure, and Ministry of Local Government. Next slide. And so going to the last few slides, basically, the third thing was to develop a marketing or prospectus document that would eventually be going out to the investors to help them explain what are we raising the bonds for, what are the projects that would be financed, what would be the returns or the interest from a broader national development perspective. And so what happened was that this marketing document, the prospectus document, would also have the feasibility studies attached to these documents as well. Should someone want to dig into each of the projects, they would be able to do so. So next slide. The prospectus process basically entailed developing a national prospectus document that included, as I mentioned earlier, the priorities of the national ocean policy, the frameworks and the guidelines set up in the sustainable bond framework that eventually develop the prospectus that you see on the right of the screen. And if anyone is interested in this, it's a simple Google search away. If you Google Fiji Sovereign Blue Bond Prospectus, it would be one of the first or second search results. Next slide. And so once the prospectus was developed, the other thing was to also get a second party opinion, a third party international reviewer. Sustainalytics had reviewed the prospectus to ensure that it was aligned to national best practices, or international best practices rather, and to be able to cross-check and quality check that it was not just some blue washing agenda that was being run by by Fiji itself. And so this was given the highest rating possible, A grade rating, a gold rating rather. This review is also available online should anyone be interested. So once all of these criteria and prospectus documents were created, we then did a roadshow with potential investors, and these were local investors, to ensure that the market returns or the market interest was quite significant. And we are proud to say that the Fiji Sovereign Blue Bond was oversubscribed 3 times over. So basically what I mean by that is we went to the market looking for 10 million US dollars. There were bids coming into the tune of around 30 million as well, or up to 30 million. So it was oversubscribed. We had to return the remaining funds of excess of 20 million because it was not programmed in any way. And so it was a financial success. Next slide. And lastly was the issuance process. So for a developing country, usually the Reserve Bank or the National Reserve Bank basically issues the bonds. In this case, the Reserve Bank of Fiji had done the issuance. The bonds were issued in 2 rates or in 2 segments. One was a 3-year term at a 1% interest rate, and the other was a 15-year term at 4.7% interest rate. It was the cheapest ever sovereign bond that was issued by the Fijian government, again underscoring the fact that it was a financial success. Next slide. Then, of course, we are in this phase right now, phase 5, where we are in step 5 rather, where we are now in the process of monitoring and reporting, impact reporting. International best practices suggest that reporting should happen every year. However, given that the bond size was quite low, about $10 million, utilization as well in this part of the world is not as high. The Fijian government decided to do a 2-year reporting. So now we are in, we've just finished the 2nd year of the issuance, and the impact reporting is underway. Next slide. Very quickly, this is my last slide. Achievements to date: 82% of all the proceeds have been utilized. Impact reporting, as I mentioned, is now being supported or underway with the support of Government of the United Kingdom. Apologies for the typo; it should not be Government of Tuvalu. That's a typo. Again, as I mentioned, a 2-year reporting cycle. But however, we've done preliminary assessments or community consultations and discussions with community beneficiaries. And as you will see on the screen, there's been very good feedback coming in from some of the communities. What you see is a seaweed farming program initiative that is running quite well now for the past 2 years, for example, in one of the islands in Fiji. And so there's a lot more to come, so watch this space. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll hand it back to Moshin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vinil, for spotlighting Fiji's Blue Bond and discussing how innovative financing can align ocean conservation with sustainable economic growth, demonstrating leadership, of course, among small island developing state contexts. Our next speaker for today is Mr. Musab Habib, who is the manager for the Insurance Supervision Department, Central Bank of Maldives. And his presentation today will be focusing on coral reef insurance. Mr. Musab Habib.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. My name is Mr. Bhavi. I'm from Insurance Division of Maldives Maritime Authority. Before reporting, I would like to speak about our experience of coral reef insurance in the Maldives. Before going into the presentation, I would like to thank UNDP, especially the team, Biofin team, and IRFF team, and the consultant team in Exoclimate, who are the technical consultants for this project. Next slide. So just to give a quick project overview project overview. So back in 2022, MMA and UNDP had a discussion of exploring how insurance can be utilized as a risk mechanism in the Maldives. So these discussions led to a study in diagnostic study in 2023, where it was identified that there was a need to protect our natural assets. And given that tourism industry is the main sector of the Maldives, it was prioritized that we should protect our coral reefs. Next slide. Given that Maldives is also a SID country, like many other SID countries, we also face severe challenges. Some of them are geographic dispersion, climate exposure, economic concentration, and limited resilience. From a geographic perspective, Maldives consists of over 1,000 islands, which is in making its infrastructure and service delivery complex and costly. And for climate exposure, we are very much exposed to higher sea level rises and storm surges and coral bleaching events. And like I mentioned before, tourism and fisheries accounts for 20% of the GDP, creating vulnerability to environmental shocks. Next slide. From a regulatory perspective, I would like to say that large environmental shocks without adequate insurance mechanisms such as the protection for our coral reef insurance create a sustainable contingent liabilities that threaten overall economic stability. Next slide. So this is basically the what we are now today. As I mentioned earlier, in 2022 we completed a diagnostic study, and right now we have completed a coral feasibility study, and currently we are in the discussion of formulating a parametric insurance for the Maldives. Next slide, please. So the main risk identified from the study was marine heat waves, and the reason being that it is highly insurable via parametric data we have right now. And just to give a brief history, these marine heat wave caused 90% coral loss in 1998 alone and 65% in 2016. So the feasibility study also suggested some of the structures with the where we could go for which is either pyramid structure, geometry structure, or hybrid design. Next slide, please. So the risk modeling, these are some of the risk models we used during the study, which is NOAA coral reefs. And I would like to highlight that Maldives Maritime Research Institute have over 57 permanent coral sites, which gives quite few accurate data, making it very viable for this project. And currently, NOAA indicates a warning of bleaching for the next upcoming days, as also specified in the study. Next slide. So just to give a snapshot of the value of our coral reefs contributes to 20% of the national GDP through tourism and fisheries, with 442 million in avoided flood damage annually. And from an economic point, reef degradation could lead to 148.54 million in losses over 30 years in North Ariatoll. North Ariatoll is one of the atoll in on Maldives. We have other atoll like southern atolls also. So this is just one atoll we are talking about here. So this shows the importance. This shows how we can the importance of having these kind of structures in the house. Moving next slide. So moving on, the study also shows that how we can go for either we could go for a private or a traditional insurance. However, the study suggested that in the case of Maldives, the parametric cover would be better, given that either for the risk claim purposes, either the government could create a reserve fund where it can give funds in low events, and in higher situations like coral bleach events, the parametric covers will trigger. Next slide, please. So this is basically the stakeholder ecosystem. We have huge stakeholders. We have government bodies, ministries such as fisheries ministries, finance ministries, and tourism ministries also involved, local councils are involved, and technical partners also. So this is just a look of how our stakeholder system. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges we had was data gaps, capacity limitations, regulatory issues, affordability, operational readiness, and monitoring gaps. Addressing these challenges requires coordinated effort between government, private sector, and international partners. Since I'm also from a regulatory background, currently we do not have any framework out there for parametric covers. However, going forward, we are planning to have a draft framework to allow issuance of parametric covers in the Maldives. Next slide, please. So I will be talking that one of the key findings core findings from the study was that either we could have a macro or a mesostructure, which I will be talking in the upcoming slides. Next slide. So these are some of the financial structure and governance frameworks highlighted in the study. So talking about financial structure, it suggested that either the government can allocate funds from a national budget for coral reef conservation and insurance premiums, and or environmental devices, tourism and environmental fees to fund reef insurance program, or resort co-finances. Private sector could contribute from tourism industry stakeholders or development partners, international climate funds, and development finance institutions. So, when it comes to governance framework, steering committees, multi-stakeholder body with representatives from MMA, ministries, and private sector. I would like to also highlight that currently we are engaging with other ministries to develop a steering, informing of a steering committee. Next slide, please. So I think I have already talked about our implementation stage. Right now, we are in the discussion stage of formulating parametric cover. Next slide, please. So this is the main structure as that the feasibility study showed. In the macro scheme, where resorts or local communities or resort owners can act as a policy holder and fund their own premiums, or at a meso level where this can be from regional aggregators, or at the macro level where the government could act as a policy holder and finance the premiums through national budgets or taxes. Next slide. So given that some of the plans we ahead is that currently we are also exploring the possibility of having fisheries insurance and agriculture insurance policies, because currently we do not have any sort of parametric or index cost in the models. Just the coral reef study was just the start of our journey. So hopefully down the line we will explore other sectors as well. Thank you. Next slide.
Thank you so much, dear Musab, for highlighting the Maldives Coral Reef Insurance Initiative, showing and expanding how financial tools can be used to rapidly respond to climate-related damages and induce disasters, helping to protect critical ecosystems that underpin tourism and coastal resilience. Our final speaker for today is Megan Saunders from Coast Funds, and a case study topic is Great Bear Sea Marine Project Finance for Permanence. Please do stay online as we will bring our speakers into plenary following Megan's presentation. Over to you, Megan.
Great, thank you, Mohsin, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. So my name is Megan. I'm presenting from the west coast of Canada, and I'm here today to talk about the Great Bear Sea Project Finance for Permanence, which is a model for Indigenous-led conservation in the Great Bear Sea. And for time, I will refer to this model with the acronym PFP. So I work for an organization called Coast Funds, which is an Indigenous-led conservation financing organization. It was founded by a group of First Nations in the Pacific Northwest nearly 20 years ago in partnership with philanthropy and government. And it was founded as part of the Great Bear Rainforest PFP. And it was founded to serve the vision of the nations for long-term financing, conservation, and stewardship and economic development. So it was known as the first PFP model in the world and has since been replicated throughout the world. And essentially, the PFP model is a model for conservation at scale built around a single close of many agreements where all partners commit funding, along with stewardship and environmental protections all at once to support the long-term sustainability of that region. So I'll go to the next slide, please. Might be missing a slide. That's okay. Just to, oh, that's the, oh, sorry, the one before. Just to say that I will now, I'll orient you to the screen, the West Coast, the northern West Coast of Canada. So this slide shows all of the partner nations that we serve at Coast Funds and that have served these monumental environmental PFP deals. So these nations continue to sustain their complex place-based governance systems and in doing so continue to uphold their laws, cultural practices, and stewardship responsibilities. And in part, that is done through the commitments made by these agreements that the nations negotiated. So through the Great Bear Rainforest PFP and through the Great Bear Sea Bear PFP. So the lands and waters continue to be stewarded by the coastal First Nations. And as a result, this remains to be one of the most culturally and ecologically rich areas in the world. So home to over 15 different language groups, one of the last remaining coastal temperate rainforests, and lots of ecology like whales and bears and orcas, just to name a few. But I can go to the next slide. So this is a quote from the chair of Coast Funds, who's also a Kwakwaka'wakw leader from the region. So as I mentioned previously, Coast Funds was created almost 20 years ago as a result of a land-based PFP. And since then, the nations have been working hard to integrate the full vision of land and sea, so for the sustainable stewardship of the region. I'll go to the next slide, please. So the maps on the screen show the spatial areas of protected and co-managed areas along the Great Bear Coast that have been secured through the Great Bear Sea and Great Bear Rainforest PFPs. They're both very significant regions to the world. On the left is the Great Bear Rainforest. It's, as I said, it's one of the largest intact remaining coastal temperate rainforests in the world, spanning 17 million acres. The Great Bear Rainforest, PFP, helped shift away from industrial scale logging in the region. And on the right is the Great Bear Sea, also known as the Northern Shelf Bioregion. So this stretches about 2/3 of the coast in British Columbia, and it's known to be one of the world's most productive cold water marine ecosystems. So the map there is showing the MPA network, the Marine Protected Area Network, which covers about 10.2 million hectares, and with about 30% of the region now coming under protection. So this network has been designed after more than 15 years of planning and engagement with the First Nations, with the Government of Canada and the Government of British Columbia, to co-develop this network through collaborative governance structures. I'll go to the next slide, please. So to develop and secure the Great Bear Sea PFP, something at this scale, there was a governance model to manage the project. And this visual shows how the nations organize themselves to work with partners and to lead such an ambitious project, which required significant coordination, complexity, and many decisions in a short time frame. So you'll see on this org chart that the individual First Nations at the very top are the rights holders and the decision makers. So there were 17 First Nations participating, and they mandated the Coast Solutions Task Group, kind of the central bubble there, to steer the work to support the development of the PFP. So this model allowed us to uphold the rights of the individual nations, and while working together to advance this big, ambitious initiative. So these are well-established structures that the nations have worked through in similar initiatives to advance complex work, partnership work. I will go to the next slide. So a key component of the PFP is a comprehensive conservation plan for the permanent protection and stewardship in the region. So in the case of the Great Bear Sea, this slide is just highlighting that there was close to 20 years of marine planning work that the First Nations led with the Crown governments, partners, and other stakeholders to carry out the research and create the plans to develop the action plan, which was the conservation plan for the PFP. And this planning was ultimately built off of the foundation of the Great Bear Rainforest, and it was really what made the Great Bear Sea possible to secure the deal. So I will go to the next slide, please. So I've mentioned PFP several times. Many of you have probably heard of PFPs. There's a lot of places and resources that you can read about PFPs. So typically they follow these stages that I've outlined here on the slide. And they somewhat work as stage gates. So starting with a pre-development, and then moving into a feasibility stage to assess the resources and enabling conditions on whether to advance the development of the PFP. The bulk of the work then occurs in development, which includes negotiating all the agreements, creating the fund architecture and financial model, and then eventually leading into a single close to outline all of the commitments of the PFP, and then eventually going into implementation. I'll go to the next slide, please. So this is the snapshot of the PFP revenue model. So this is kind of the basis for permanent financing for the Great Bear Sea. So to create this, first we started with looking at what are the overall targets for how much money is needed to finance the First Nations stewardship departments and marine protection efforts over 20 years. So part of that was identified through our feasibility work, kind of assessing what would be needed to develop the PFP. And then through coast funds, we had good data on how much a nation's stewardship programming might cost. So we forecasted from that with the nations over 20 years for 17 nations and settled on, through a lot of analysis, settled on a target of 748 million. But we knew that we did not need that 748 million upfront, like through this model. Our experience in the Great Bear Rainforest shows that the nations can leverage this conservation funding by combining with and attracting other revenue sources. So we worked backwards from that number and determined that we would need about 335 million Canadian at closing and can generate another 413 million from other sources over the next 20 years. I will go to the next slide, please. So this is just a list of all of the funders and partners that made this large deal possible, and all to say that none of the work would be possible without from these parties. I will go to the next slide. So we have, if you're interested in more information about what the Great Bear Sea PFP is, how it was built, and what the partners have learned through this process, we've just released a publication which includes interviews and information gathered from all the partners on how it was built, and along with an accompanying video to narrate the story of how it was developed through the past couple of years. I think I will leave it at that. Thank
you so much, Megan, for sharing your experiences around the PFP model. Of course, PFPs are not easy undertakings, but congratulations anyways. I'm sure you have stirred some thinking around the model today. And we can definitely draw inspiration from this model should partners, funders, they plan to go along this direction. That being said, we are now going to move into the panel discussion with four of our presenters today, Sora, Vinil, Musab, and Megan. And we will open up the conversation. We want it to be very interactive. And may I kindly request my colleagues, Alexis, Alicia, to help me with the chat questions that may have come around while the presenters were speaking. So the first question from our audience was, this is something that I've picked up. It would be useful for the organizers to use this session to circulate a short survey among participants and map who is developing pilots or deploying innovative nature finance mechanisms on oceans and coastal ecosystems in the context of where, in which ecosystems, and in what scale is that planned at all. Yes, this is possible, but we haven't planned it for now. We can do it surely after the webinar, and we will also share the recordings and the slides. There's this another question on blue bonds. It says blue bonds seems like an interesting opportunity. It can attract private capital, but eventually the government has to pay back the bond, right? With maybe lower interest. The government is still funding the project. Can you already see quantified costs saving on the national budget to defend this public expense? And the follow-up question to that is, I will give this floor to Vinil to answer the first question. And then there is a follow-up question, Vinil, for you as well. For the Fiji Blue Bond, how long was the process from starting to raising the funding for transaction costs to issuing the bond? Who subscribed to the bond? Is it publicly available? What is the percentage of private investors versus actors from the development finance community?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for those questions. I'll answer the one around, well, the first question first. Around the fact that it's important to know that some of these projects that we had identified under the blue bonds were actually probably not going to happen because of the fact that this was post-COVID, just post-COVID, and there were a lot of priorities for the Fijian government that to some extent superseded socioeconomic priorities, that to some extent superseded blue economy investment opportunities or priorities. And so the idea here was to be able to, through the blue bonds, prepone some of these investments that would not have happened at least for the next 5 to 10 years. So to clearly answer the question, yes, there is generally a cost saving to be able to do those projects now. Doing it now would be much more cheaper from a net present value perspective than doing it down the line when costs of goods, materials, etc. would be higher. So we have not quantified that as a very clearly at the moment, I must admit, but one where cost savings do clearly exist, where you would do the interventions now as opposed to doing it down the line and incurring greater costs per se. With regards to the question around probably the second question was pretty packed, Mohsin. So probably if you could just say that again, and I'll answer them subsequently. But could you repeat the question?
Sure, Vinil. So the question is, for the Fiji Blue Bond, how long was the process from starting to raising the funding for transaction cost to issuing the bond? And another follow-up question is, who subscribed to the bond? Is that publicly available?
Sure. So the transaction process from the design itself all the way to issuance was around about 18 months. It was because it was the first ever thematic bond issuance of its kind. In any other sort of Pacific or island-based countries, we would be able to do that faster if the need is there, if the urgency is there. In terms of who bought the bonds, so it was a sovereign bond issuance issued domestically. Your bonds can be issued three ways, largely two ways mainly. One is domestic and one is international. And this particular bond was issued domestically in Fijian dollars. And the buyers were mainly domestic commercial banks and long-term financiers or long-term corporations like the National Provident Fund, life insurance corporations, etc. So three of the five commercial banks in the country had invested or bought the 3-year term bond, and two large are long-term investors. I won't be able to name them for confidentiality reasons, but basically, two of the other ones had invested in the long-term issuance. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you, Vinil. And the final question to you is, how were the proceeds used as part of the Fiji case, or are being used for that matter?
Sure. I think I did touch base on in my presentation. It's being used across the 18 government projects. Particularly, most of them, or majority of them, around 52% is around coastal fisheries development, sustainable coastal fisheries development. And an example of that was in my presentation. Give my contact and then discuss further down the line with people who are interested specifically.
Thank you, Vinil. So our next set of questions is for Dia Musab. So your question is on insurance payouts can only provide financial relief after a disaster, but they can neither lower the ocean's temperature nor revive dead corals. As temperatures rise and sargassum continues to suffocate the ecosystem, every passing day is like a losing battle. And the question is, instead of investing only in post-damage management, why aren't we investing in aggressive deep tech solutions that can stop the problems such as nutrient runoff and methane emissions before it even occurs? Can money really replace a lost ecosystem? So this question is for our dear Musab. Over to you, Musab.
Hello. Yeah. In the case of Maurice, I would like to say that we don't have a lot of risk mechanisms here in the Maurice, but we have is right now so few solutions. So using the few solutions, we are trying to build our sustainable capabilities. So with that being said, currently we are focusing on protecting our coral, formation of the coral reef insurance. So regarding the green ones, I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with them because I'm from the insurance background. So I will have to get back to you regarding that.
Okay, thank you, Musab. The next question is for is on PFP. So the question reads, could you develop what alternative revenue sources were considered in the Great Bear PFP? Megan, this question is for you.
Yeah, I would say to respond in the case of the Great Bear Sea PFP, because the nations had had such success with the previous PFP, the Great Bear Rainforest PFP, that really set the case or kind of made the PFP as the winner, as the selected model. So it was really an easy decision to choose a PFP building off that foundation.
And okay, thank you. And the follow-up question to that is, in terms of private, that is a return on investment money, not philanthropy, what is the percentage in the broader PFP setup?
I guess it depends on if you're asking about PFPs generally. That will vary by PFP. In the case of the Great Bear Sea PFP and the Great Bear Seas and the PFPs in Canada, there was a 4-to-1 ratio of Crown government investment to philanthropic investment. So if you do see the breakdown, I believe it's 75 million was from philanthropic investors, and the remaining of the 335 million was contributed by Crown governments. But it's not a prescriptive breakdown for PFPs.
Thank you. So there are some cross-cutting questions which our colleagues, the four of you, can perhaps shed some light on. So it says, how do you plan to evaluate the outcomes and impacts of your financial products and initiative? and what evaluation criteria frameworks are you using, and what is their timeline? So I will give this over to Megan first, followed by Vinil, and then by Musab. So I'll repeat the question for you, Megan. How do you plan to evaluate the outcomes and impacts of your financial products or initiatives? What evaluation criteria and frameworks are you using, and what is their timeline?
So we have Coast Funds has been developing an outcomes monitoring framework with the nations as part of the outcomes monitoring to support the Great Bear Rainforest PFB. So that was somewhat of a foundation for the Great Bear Sea PFB. And we do have quite a few publications on indicating what's included. So it not only monitors the outcomes of the site establishments, the areas that are protected, stewardship outcomes for the area, but also includes the number of businesses, the number of jobs, the amount of education and training programs that were accessed through this funding. And then it also has other outcomes that we look at, like cultural objectives. How much of the funding supported enhanced or cultural resurgence for the nations. So we have quite a wide variety of outcomes that are monitored. And part of that was because those outcomes were really co-developed with the nations based on their interests of how they would like to see these funds tracked. And it's all available online for anyone of interest.
Over to Vinil.
Thank you. For the Fiji sovereign blue bond, as I've mentioned, we're under a 2-year reporting period now. The second year reporting period, we have developed a monitoring reporting framework for the blue bonds using ICMA reporting guidelines and standards. So ICMA being the International Capital Market Association standards, they are available online, but of course contextualized to Fiji's perspective and Fiji's programs. We are wanting to complete the reporting by June this year and to have the report published by July. And so would be happy to, through the Biofin initiative or through this organizers of the
Thank you, Vinil. We'll move quickly to Musab. Musab, if you could just shed some light on the financial products and initiatives and the indicators.
Could you repeat it? Hello?
Hello, Musab. So the question is around the coral reef insurance initiative, and the question says this: how do you plan to evaluate the outcomes and impacts of these financial products or initiatives, and what evaluation criteria and frameworks you are using?
Currently, we are engaging with the relevant ministries from the central bank. We are engaging with the relevant ministries, finance ministries, and other stakeholders to evaluate our guidelines and our initiatives. Right now, as I have mentioned before, this is just a feasibility study we have conducted. So far, we have not initiated a product yet, and currently we are engaging with the consultants and other relevant stakeholders. So right now, what we can say is that we are in line with the government objectives and our broader framework.
Thank you, Musab. The next two questions I have received is for Sora Yoon. So Sora, the first question is, how can a UNEP's regional sea program monitoring and reporting framework contribute to NBSAPs implementation and marine finance? And then I'll move on to the next question.
Yes, thank you for the questions. The regional seas recently updated this indicator framework. We currently support all 18 regional seas to update or adjust their monitoring systems while considering each region's specific traits and priorities. So each regionality can track progress and identify where NBSAP implementation is falling short and direct support accordingly. So regarding marine finance, investors and biodiversity funds need a credible baseline, measurable outcomes, and verifiable results. These kind of harmonized regional monitoring and reporting can support that at a scale that goes beyond the individual projects, but providing a broader evidence base that strengthens investor confidence across an entire region. In addition, this framework provides member states with a foundation to build their monitoring and reporting capacity to meet the credibility and accountability standards that investors require. Sorry, Merson, you're on mute.
Sorry. So your next question is, what are the key challenges and solutions for translating the Global Biodiversity Framework commitments into effective national action through regional corporations?
There are among several key challenges I want to explain two things. First is the translation gap between global ambitions and national reality. The GBF sets bold targets, but what does 30 by 30 actually mean for a small island state managing coral reef or West Africa country expanding its MPA network? Regional Cs provide the contextual bridge, the workshops, guidance, and country-specific support, helping member states develop the clearly defined and regionally grounded priorities that are more actionable and more attractive to finance. The second one is the capacity, developing, implementing, and national biodiversity plans and accessing financing proposals. These all requires sustained technical expertise. So regional cooperation is one of the most effective ways to address these because capacity developed through regional platforms benefits multiple countries simultaneously. So, and going forward, we are deliberately expanding the support to include finance readiness, and that's also included in our finance matchmaking and investment structuring plans.
Thank you, Sora. In the interest of time, I'll be quickly taking some very key questions that has been falling to me in the chat. So the next one is for Vinil. With regards to the oversubscription of the blue bonds, how was that achieved? What role did you and your organization UNDP play in this? Vinil, I wonder if you had my question. So the question is
could you
with
repeat that?
regards.
Sorry.
So the question that has come through is with regards to the oversubscription of the blue bonds, how was that achieved? What role did you and your UNDP as an organization play in this? You're mute, Vinil.
Sure. So UNDP was basically providing technical guidance and support to the government, structuring the whole project that I just presented on. But in terms of how did we achieve the oversubscription, I think that was attributed to step number 4, where we had actually gone through a comprehensive marketing sort of strategy or roadshow, where we went to each of the potential buyers of the bonds and really gave them an overview of what would be the additional benefits to them and growing their market share should they be purchasing the bond and helping the Fijian government invest in the blue economy space. There was quite a number of narratives that we had built around the fact that these investors are actually growing their own market opportunities. So banks are growing the banking sector through bringing in informal sector and the blue economy space, the formal sector. We also really worked on the long-term life insurance corporations as well, making the case that they would be able to create business per se. And so UNDP really was there to help craft not only the business case, but also the human interest stories and human interest perspectives as well, to make sure that these potential investors were clearly understanding the need for and the justification behind the Fijian government issuing a thematic bond. And like I mentioned, that resulted definitely in a very good market response, where the bonds were oversubscribed 3 times. Thanks.
Thank you, Vinil. So the final question that I will take for today is on the PFP for Megan. The question is, indigenous governance is central to the Great Bear Sea model. How was free, prior, and informed consent built into the financial architecture, not just the conservation planning part of it? Megan?
Yeah, I would say that if I had brought up the org structure for how we work together between the nations, and it was really through that governance model that enabled all of the agreements, all of the financial architecture to be all the decisions to be rested with the nations. So it was really through how the nations organized and structured themselves between the partners in order to negotiate that strong governance model based on previous work. So there had been other initiatives where the nations had organized themselves in that way, but that really enabled for all of the decisions and direction to be guided by the leadership of the nations.
Thank you, Megan. So, my dear friends and colleagues, in the interest of time, we will be responding to your questions. We will bulk the questions to our presenters and kindly request them to respond to each one of you with the commentaries that they have. So as part of the series, we will be organizing the next webinar on the topic nature markets in the month of June, and the dates will be socialized soon. So with that said, we have finally reached the end of today's session. And I would like to wholeheartedly thank all of you for your time and participation in today's webinar. Before concluding this meeting, I would like to express our gratitude and sincere thanks to the Global Environment Facility, GEF, for providing the funds for this project, and our partners at the UNDP Biofin, UNDP and UNEP and NBSAP program, Green Finance Institute, UNEP-FI for all the joint work in this GEF project. Many thanks also to our presenters for providing this useful and insightful information drawn from their expertise and their experiences. And as a reminder, all the recordings, presentations, and questions and answer documents of the previous webinars are on the webinar page, which my colleague is dropping in the chat, the link to that. We will send you further information by email as soon as the information on the next webinar is available. Finally, at the end of the session, you will receive a quick survey, which will take 1 minute to respond. So please, by all means, feel free to utilize your 1 minute to respond to the survey. We appreciate each and every one of you for your presence here today. And we appreciate your feedback, your questions, the clarifications that you've sought, which will assist us in continuing to offer quality webinars as such. And we look forward to continuing to work with you all. Thank you very much, and a big Vinaka Vakalevu from Fiji.